The storm came like a living thing, clawing at the edges of Varen territory with wind that screamed through the black pines. Mira Dune stood in the doorway of her family's farmhouse, watching her father's hands shake as he pressed the seal into hot wax. The contract. The one that would erase every debt the Dune family owed, and take away the one thing Mira thought could never be sold. Her. Papa. Please. Her voice barely rose above the howling wind. There has to be another way. Merrick Dune wouldn't look at her. His weathered face was gray, older than it had been that morning. The man standing across from him, Darian Voss, smiled. It was the kind of smile that made Mira's skin crawl, cold and satisfied. The contract is clear, Darian said, his voice smooth as oil. Your daughter in exchange for all Dune debts. Blood, coin, and kind. Ronan Drax has agreed to the terms. Mira's mother, Saphira, gripped her daughter's hand so tightly it hurt. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. Remember what I taught you, Mira. An Omega's worth is not decided by an Alpha's command. Your heart is stronger than any of them know. But as the ink dried and Darian Voss folded the contract into his coat, Myra felt her heart breaking into pieces too small to count. 3 days later, she was bound and placed in a carriage that smelled of leather and rain. Her younger sister Naraya had cried until she couldn't breathe. Her father couldn't meet her eyes, and her mother had pressed something into her palm before the guards pulled her away, a small silver ring, worn smooth with age. Keep this, Saphira had whispered. Remember who you are. Now. As the carriage rolled through the gates of Drax territory, Mira clutched that ring like it was the last piece of herself she had left. The landscape changed. The trees grew taller, darker, their branches twisted like reaching claws. The air tasted different here, heavy with power and old blood. When the carriage finally stopped, Mira's wrists were raw from the ropes. Her cloak was soaked through. A guard opened the door, and cold wind rushed in, stealing her breath. Out, he said. Mira stepped down onto stone slick with rain. The courtyard of Drax Keep stretched before her, massive and terrifying. Towers rose like black teeth against the storm-dark sky. Silver banners snapped in the wind, each one marked with the Drax crest, a wolf's head, jaws open, eyes that seemed to follow her. Wolves in armor lined the courtyard, dozens of them, all watching her with eyes that glowed faintly in the torchlight. None of them bowed. None of them moved. They just stared at the Omega who had been bought and paid for. A woman stepped forward, tall and severe, her gray hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her face. I am Era Thorn, head of the household. You will follow me. You will speak when spoken to. You will not embarrass the Alpha King with your weakness. Mira's jaw tightened. She wanted to scream. She wanted to run. Instead, she lifted her chin and said nothing. Era's mouth thinned. This way. But before Mira could take a step, the massive doors at the top of the stone staircase opened. Every wolf in the courtyard dropped to one knee. The sound of armor and bodies hitting stone echoed like thunder. Mira's breath caught. Ronan Drax stepped into the torchlight. He was taller than she'd imagined, broader, his presence so heavy it seemed to press down on the entire courtyard. Dark hair fell across his forehead, damp from the rain. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray and merciless. He wore black leather and dark metal, no crown, no ornament. He didn't need them. Power rolled off him in waves that made Mira's knees want to buckle. This was the Alpha King who had killed 3 rivals in one night. The man who had claimed the Drax throne standing over the bodies of traitors. The wolf who didn't believe in mates, only in dominance and control, and now he owned her. He descended the stairs slowly, his gaze locked on Mira. She felt it like a weight, like being pinned beneath something vast and inescapable. The wolves stayed down. The wind howled, and Ronan Drax stopped 3 steps above her, close enough that she could smell rain and leather and something wild underneath. So, he said, his voice low and rough, this is what a debt looks like. Mira's heart pounded so hard she thought it would crack her ribs. She had 2 choices, bow her head and become what they expected, or fight for the last shred of dignity she had left. She chose to fight. Let's make this quick, Your Majesty. Her voice shook, but she forced the words out. I wasn't given a choice in this, but I'll survive it. For a moment, there was only silence. Then Ronan's mouth curved into something that might have been a smile if it hadn't been so sharp. You think survival is enough? He came down the last 3 steps, stopping so close she could feel the heat radiating from him. You're a debt, Omega. Debts don't negotiate. He circled her slowly, his gaze raking over her torn cloak, her muddy boots, the stubborn set of her jaw. Mira forced herself to stand still, even as every instinct screamed at her to run. When he stopped in front of her again, he leaned down, his mouth close to her ear. You smell like fear and rain. Like something that doesn't belong here. Mira clenched her fists. Then let me go. No. The word was final. Absolute. He straightened and gestured to Era. Take her inside. Burn everything she brought with her. She starts here with nothing. Mira's hand flew to her pocket, searching for her mother's ring. Her fingers found only empty fabric. Panic surged through her. Wait. But Ronan had already turned away, the doors closing behind him. Era's hand clamped around Mira's arm, dragging her forward. Move. Mira stumbled up the steps, her mind racing. The ring. The one piece of home. The one thing that said she was still herself. Gone. Taken before she'd even crossed the threshold. As the doors of Drax Keep closed behind her, sealing her inside, Mira made a silent vow. She would survive this place. She would survive him. And she would never, ever break, even if it killed her. Hey, quick question, how are you feeling right now? Thank you so much for being here. It really means the world to me. If Mira's story is already pulling at your heart, please hit that subscribe button for Ariel Romance Library, smash the like, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. It helps more than you know. Alright, thank you. Now let's get back to what happens when the girl sold as a debt bride becomes the most dangerous Alpha King's chosen queen. Drax Keep was a fortress built to swallow light. The corridors stretched endlessly, lit by torches that cast more shadow than flame. The walls were black stone, smooth and cold, carved with symbols Mira didn't recognize. Tapestries hung at intervals, each one depicting scenes of violence and triumph. Alphas standing over fallen enemies, wolves tearing through battle lines, blood painted in shades of crimson and rust. Era Thorn walked fast, her boots clicking against the stone floor. Mira struggled to keep up, her wet cloak tangling around her legs. This is the East Wing, Era said without looking back. The Alpha King's private quarters are in the North Tower. You will not enter them unless summoned. The Great Hall is west. The training grounds are outside the southern gate. The kitchens are below. You will learn quickly, or you will be lost. Mira wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Where was she allowed to go? Who else lived here? What would happen to her if she disobeyed? But Ira's rigid back and clipped tone made it clear that questions were not welcome. They stopped in front of a heavy wooden door carved with vines and thorns. Era pushed it open. Your room. Mira stepped inside and felt her breath leave her body. The room was beautiful. A massive 4-poster bed dominated the space, draped in deep blue silk that shimmered in the firelight. Thick carpets covered the floor, soft enough to sink into. A wardrobe stood against one wall, its doors carved with intricate designs. A fire crackled in the hearth, filling the room with warmth. But the windows were narrow, set high in the walls, too high to reach. And when Mira turned back to the door, she saw the heavy iron lock on the outside. A cage. A beautiful, suffocating cage. Dresses have been provided, Era said, gesturing to the wardrobe. You will dress appropriately for court. Meals will be brought to you until the Alpha King decides otherwise. Do not leave this room without escort. When will I see him again? Mira asked, hating how small her voice sounded. Era's expression didn't change. When he decides you're worth his time. The door closed with a heavy thud. The lock clicked into place. Mira stood in the center of the room, surrounded by luxury she'd never known and trapped more completely than she'd ever been. She crossed to the wardrobe and opened it. Inside were gowns in shades of silver, blue, and deep violet, each one finer than anything she'd owned in her entire life. The fabric was soft, almost liquid under her fingers. She hated them. She hated that they were beautiful. She hated that they fit perfectly, as if someone had measured her body without her knowledge. She hated that wearing them would mean accepting this place, this life, this cage, but she had no other choice. Mira sank onto the edge of the bed and buried her face in her hands. The weight of everything crashed down on her all at once. Her father's betrayal, her mother's tears, Naraya's small hands clinging to her, the cold certainty in Ronan Drax's eyes. She was alone. Truly, utterly alone. A soft knock broke through her thoughts. Mira's head snapped up. The door opened, and a young woman slipped inside, carrying a tray. She had warm brown skin and kind eyes, her dark hair braided over one shoulder. She moved quietly, almost nervously, setting the tray on the small table near the fire. I'm Kaya, she said softly. Kaya Rowan. I'm one of the household staff. I brought you food. Mira stared at her. Thank you. Kaya hesitated, then glanced back at the door. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. I wanted to tell you something. About him. About the Alpha King. Mira's pulse quickened. What about him? He's not what people say. I mean, he is dangerous. Everyone here is afraid of him, but he's not cruel, not like some of the others. Kaya's fingers twisted in her apron. I've seen him protect wolves that other alphas would have killed. He's hard, but he's not heartless. Why are you telling me this? Mira asked. Kaya met her eyes. Because you're scared. And alone. And I know what that feels like. She moved toward the door, then paused. There are worse alphas you could have been sold to. Remember that. Before Mira could respond, Kaya was gone, the door locking behind her. Mira looked down at the tray. Bread, still warm, roasted meat. Fruit she didn't recognize. Her stomach twisted with hunger, but she couldn't bring herself to eat. Instead, she moved to the narrow window and looked out at the storm-lashed forest beyond. Somewhere out there was her family, her home, the life she'd been torn away from. But here, in this fortress of wolves and shadows, she was nothing but a debt paid in flesh. Hours passed. The fire burned low. Mira paced the room until her legs ached, then sat by the window until the cold seeped into her bones. She tried to sleep but couldn't. Every sound made her jump. Every shadow seemed to move. Then, near midnight, the lock clicked. Mira spun around, her heart hammering. The door opened. Ronan Drax stepped inside. He filled the doorway, tall and imposing even without his armor. He wore a simple black shirt, the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms marked with scars. His hair was still damp, his expression unreadable. You didn't eat, he said. Mira's throat went dry. I wasn't hungry. Lie. He closed the door behind him, and the room suddenly felt impossibly small. You're starving. I can smell it. He crossed to the table, picked up the plate, and held it out. Eat! I don't take orders from you. His eyes darkened. Yes, you do. Mira's hands clenched into fists. You bought me. You didn't break me. For a long moment, they stared at each other. The air between them crackled with tension, sharp and electric. Then, Ronan set the plate down and moved closer, stopping just inches away. You think defiance makes you strong? His voice was low, almost gentle. It makes you reckless. Better reckless than broken. Something flickered in his eyes. Amusement, maybe. Or respect. He reached out, slowly, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers were rough, calloused, but his touch was surprisingly careful. Mira's breath caught. Heat flooded through her, sudden and unwelcome. She hated how her body responded to him, hated the way her pulse raced when he was close. You're not what I expected, Ronan said quietly. What did you expect? Tears, begging, submission. His gaze dropped to her mouth. You've given me none of those things. Good? He smiled then, a real smile, sharp and dangerous. Good. Then he stepped back, putting distance between them. Sleep. Tomorrow, you'll meet the court. They'll be watching you, judging you. If you want to survive here, you'll need to be smarter than you were tonight. And if I don't want to survive? Mira asked. What if I want to leave? Ronan's expression hardened. Leaving isn't an option. You're mine now, Mira Dune. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be. He turned and walked to the door. Before he left, he looked back at her. His eyes shadowed. You could have said no, Mira said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. When my father offered me as payment, you could have refused. Ronan's jaw tightened. Dead men can't be useful. A debt bride can. That's not an answer. It's the only one you'll get tonight. The door closed. The lock clicked. Mira stood alone in the firelight, her heart racing, her body still tingling where he'd touched her. She hated him. She hated this place. But beneath the hate, something else stirred, something she didn't want to name. Curiosity, interest, and the terrible, traitorous flicker of attraction. She crossed to the bed and lay down, still fully dressed, staring up at the canopy above her. Tomorrow she would face the court. Tomorrow she would see just how deep this cage really went. But tonight, all she could think about was the way Ronan Drax had looked at her, like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve, like she was dangerous, like she mattered. And maybe, just maybe, that was the key to surviving this nightmare. Morning came with pale gray light filtering through the high windows. Mira woke to the sound of the lock turning. Kaya entered, carrying fresh clothes and a basin of warm water. Good morning, Kaya said, her voice quiet. The Alpha King wants you in the Great Hall for breakfast. You'll be presented to the court. Mira's stomach dropped. Presented? They need to see you, to know you're real. Kaya set the basin down and gestured to the wardrobe. There's a dress. Silver. He chose it himself. Mira wanted to refuse. She wanted to throw the dress in the fire and lock herself in this room until they forgot she existed. But she'd learned long ago that stubbornness only worked if you had power. Here, she had none. She washed quickly, the warm water a small mercy against her cold skin. The dress was beautiful and terrible all at once, silver silk that clung to her body. The neckline cut just low enough to make her feel exposed. It whispered when she moved, expensive and foreign. Kaya helped her with her hair, braiding it back from her face. "You look like a queen," she said softly. "I look like a prisoner in fancy clothes." Kaya's hand stilled. Sometimes those are the same thing. Arathorn arrived to escort her. They walked through corridors that seemed even more maze-like in daylight. Mira glimpsed other wolves, servants, guards, courtiers, all of them, pausing to stare as she passed. Some looked curious, others looked hungry. The great hall was massive, its ceiling arched high above, supported by pillars carved to look like trees. Long tables stretched the length of the room, already filled with wolves in various states of dress and armor. At the far end, on a raised platform, sat a single table, Ronan's table. He sat at the center, his presence commanding even in stillness. To his right sat a man with battle scars cutting through his beard, Theron Cade. Mira guessed from the way he carried himself, a warrior through and through. To Ronan's left sat a woman with sharp features and calculating eyes, her dark hair streaked with silver. Elara Voss. The name surfaced from whispers Mira had heard in the carriage. Other faces lined the table. Darian Voss, cold and watchful. Cassian Rook, with a smile that never reached his eyes. More names, more faces, all of them important, all of them dangerous. Era led Mira forward. Every eye in the hall turned to watch. The conversations died. The only sound was Myra's footsteps and the rapid beating of her heart. Ronan stood as she approached. The entire hall stood with him. "This is Mira Dune," Ronan said, his voice carrying across the room. "She is under my protection. Anyone who harms her answers to me." It should have felt like safety. Instead, it felt like being claimed, marked, owned. Ronan gestured to an empty seat beside him. "Sit." Mira climbed the steps to the platform, acutely aware of every gaze on her body. She sat, her hands folded in her lap, trying to look calm even as panic clawed at her throat. A servant brought food, bread, fruit, meat, but Mira couldn't eat. The wolves at the table spoke in low voices, discussing things she didn't understand. Border patrols, supply lines, names of places she'd never heard of. Then Elara Voss leaned forward, her gaze settling on Mira with the precision of a knife. "Tell me, Miss Dune, do you have any useful skills? Or were you simply the cheapest option available?" The table went silent. Mira's face burned. She felt Ronan tense beside her. But before he could speak, she forced herself to answer. "I can read," Mira said quietly. "I can write. I can mend wounds and calm frightened animals. I can survive on less than nothing and still wake up the next morning." Elara's smile was thin. "How charming. A peasant bride with peasant skills. Enough." Ronan's voice was low, but it cut through the room like a blade. "Mira is here because I chose her to be here. That's all the explanation anyone needs." Elara inclined her head, but her eyes remained cold. "Of course, my king." The meal continued, but Mira barely tasted anything. She felt the weight of judgment pressing down on her from every direction. These wolves saw her as nothing, less than nothing, a debt, a mistake. After breakfast, Ira guided her through more of the keep. Mira saw the armory, the training yard where young wolves sparred under the watchful eyes of veterans, the gardens where winter flowers struggled against the cold. But what struck her most was the undercurrent of tension. Wolves spoke in hushed voices that stopped when she passed. Guards stood at attention, hands never far from weapons. The entire keep felt like it was holding its breath. Late in the afternoon, Mira found herself alone in a corridor lined with tall windows. Outside, snow had begun to fall, soft and silent. She pressed her hand against the cold glass and let herself imagine, just for a moment, that she was somewhere else, anywhere else. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Mira spun. A young woman stood a few feet away, her expression open and friendly. She had auburn hair and freckles across her nose, a softness that seemed out of place in this fortress of hard edges. "I'm Lyra," the woman said. "Lyra Quinn. I work in the library." "Mira, I know." Lyra moved closer, looking out the window. "You're all anyone can talk about." The debt bride. The one who stood up to the Alpha King on her first night. Mira's stomach twisted. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Depends who you ask. Lyra's smile was gentle. But if it helps, I think it's brave. Most Omegas wouldn't have lasted 5 minutes in that courtyard. I didn't have a choice. Maybe. But you chose how to stand. That matters. Lyra hesitated, then lowered her voice. Can I tell you something? Something that might help? Mira nodded. The Alpha King isn't just arrogant. He's afraid. He won the throne by killing his enemies, but he's surrounded by people he can't fully trust. The Southern Alpha, Lucien Corin, wants this territory. Ronan's own council might have a traitor in it. He's alone, Mira, and when a wolf is cornered, they either surrender or they fight. Ronan doesn't know how to surrender. Mira's mind raced. Why are you telling me this? Because you're here now. Whether you want to be or not. And if you're going to survive, you need to understand what you're in the middle of. Lyra glanced down the corridor. I should go. But if you need a friend, come find me in the library. It's the one place in this keep where people still tell the truth. She left before Mira could respond. Mira stood alone. Lyra's words echoing in her mind. A traitor. A war. An Alpha King who didn't know how to trust. She thought about the tension at breakfast. The way Darian Voss had watched Ronan. The sharpness in Alara's voice. The careful way Theron Cade spoke. Mira had always been good at reading people. It was a skill born from necessity. When you were at the bottom of the hierarchy, you learned to sense danger before it struck. She'd watched her father's moods shift like weather. She'd known which neighbors to avoid, which merchants would cheat them, which wolves in their village were safe and which were not. Here, in this nest of vipers, that skill might be the only thing keeping her alive. That night, unable to sleep, Mira sat by the fire and listened. The keep was never truly silent. Footsteps echoed in distant corridors. Voices murmured behind closed doors, and beneath it all, a low hum of anxiety that made her skin prickle. She heard them before she saw them, 2 voices in the hallway outside her room, speaking in urgent whispers. The Southern patrols are too quiet. Something's wrong. Ronan won't listen. He thinks we're paranoid. Maybe we are. Or maybe we're the only ones who see what's coming. Mira pressed her ear to the door, her heart pounding. She couldn't make out more than fragments, but one name surfaced again and again. Lucien Corin, the Southern Alpha, the enemy. The voices faded. Mira pulled back, her mind racing. War was coming. She could feel it in the air, taste it in the tension that saturated every stone of this place. And somehow, impossibly, she was caught in the center of it. A debt bride in a fortress built on blood and lies. But as Mira curled up in the massive bed, exhaustion finally dragging her toward sleep, one thought followed her into dreams. If she was already trapped in the middle of a war, maybe it was time to stop being a victim and start being a weapon. Mira woke to darkness and the sound of breathing. Her eyes snapped open. A figure stood by the window, silhouetted against the faint moonlight. Her heart leapt into her throat before she recognized the broad shoulders, the way he held himself like a storm barely contained. Ronan. What are you doing here? Mira's voice came out steadier than she felt. He didn't turn. You talk in your sleep. Ice flooded her veins. What did I say? Names. Theron, Darian, Lucien Corin. Now he looked at her, his eyes reflecting the moonlight like a wolf's. You dreamed about blood in the snow. About betrayal. Mira sat up slowly, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. They're just dreams. Are they? He moved away from the window, closer to the bed. Or did you hear something you weren't supposed to? She should have lied, should have played ignorant, but something in his gaze told her he'd know. I heard guards talking, about Southern patrols, about Lucien Corin. Ronan's jaw tightened. You should have told me immediately. You didn't exactly invite conversation. He sat on the edge of the bed, close enough that she could see the exhaustion carved into his face. 3 of my border sentries were slaughtered last week. Entire patrols, gone. Someone is feeding information to Lucien. Someone in my own court. Mira's breath caught. You think there's a traitor? I know there is. I just can't prove it. His gaze locked on hers, intense and searching. But you might be able to. What do you mean? You read people, Mira. I've seen it. The way you watch them at meals, during conversations. You see things others miss. He leaned forward. I need you to keep doing that. I need you to tell me who's lying. Horror and fascination warred inside her. You want me to spy for you. I want you to survive. And if my kingdom falls, the first people Lucien will slaughter are the weak. Omegas, children, people like you. So this is about using me. This is about trusting you with something I haven't trusted anyone else with. His voice dropped lower. You're already in danger, Mira. Being my debt bride made you a target the moment you walked through those gates. At least this way, you have power. Mira studied his face, searching for the lie, the manipulation. But all she saw was exhaustion and something raw beneath it. Fear. Not for himself, but for everyone he was responsible for. If I do this, she said slowly, you listen when I speak. No dismissing me because I'm an Omega. No ignoring what I tell you. A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. Deal. And you stop calling me a debt. I have a name. His eyes softened slightly. I know your name, Mira. The way he said it, low and careful, made something flutter in her chest. She pushed it down ruthlessly. When do we start? Now. He stood. Get dressed. The council meets in an hour. The war room was colder than the rest of the keep, as if even heat was afraid to linger there. Maps covered a massive stone table, marked with symbols and lines Mira didn't understand. Weapons hung on the walls, swords, axes, things with edges that caught the torchlight and gleamed. Ronan moved around the table, his hands braced on the stone, studying the maps with fierce concentration. Mira watched him, seeing not the arrogant king from the courtyard, but a man trying to hold together something that wanted to tear apart. The council doesn't know you'll be there, Ronan said without looking up. They'll be surprised. Some will be angry. Let them. You're there to observe, not to speak. Not yet. What am I looking for? Fear in the wrong places, satisfaction where there should be worry. Anything that feels off. He finally met her eyes. Trust your instincts. The council arrived one by one, each of them pausing in the doorway when they saw Mira sitting in a chair against the wall. She kept her face neutral, her hands folded, trying to look insignificant. Theron Cade entered first, his expression dark. He nodded to Ronan but didn't acknowledge Mira. Darian Voss came next, his cold eyes lingering on Mira for a moment too long before he took his seat. Cassian Rook sauntered in with his characteristic smirk, followed by Ilara Voss, who looked at Mira with barely concealed contempt. Others filed in Oren Lice, Malus Vorn, names Mira was still learning. The room filled with tension thick enough to choke on. Let's begin, Ronan said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. Theron, report. Theron stood, unrolling a map. 3 more skirmishes on the western border. We drove them back, but we lost 7 wolves. Good fighters, experienced. His voice was rough with grief and anger. This isn't random raiding anymore. They're testing us. Looking for weak points. Mira watched him carefully. His hands shook slightly as he pointed to locations on the map. His jaw was tight, his eyes haunted. Honest grief. Real rage. Lucien Coren is pushing harder, Theron continued. If we don't reinforce the border garrisons, we can't spare the wolves, Cassian interrupted smoothly. The southern territory is quiet right now. We should focus our strength where the actual threat is. The south is only quiet because we're watching it, Theron shot back. Or because there's no threat there to begin with. The argument escalated. Voices rose. Mira's attention drifted across faces. Reading micro-expressions. The tiny tells people didn't know they were broadcasting. Then Darian Voss spoke, his voice calm and measured. Perhaps we're looking at this wrong. The western attacks could be a diversion. Lucien might be planning something larger. Something in Mira's chest tightened. She watched Darian as he continued talking, laying out scenarios, suggesting strategies. His words were reasonable, logical. But beneath the calm exterior, she sensed something else. Satisfaction, not fear, not worry. Satisfaction. Her heart began to race. The southern border has been too quiet, Darian said. Almost suspiciously so. We should consider pulling back some of the western forces to... No. The word left Mira's mouth before she could stop it. Every head in the room turned toward her. The silence was deafening. Ronan's eyes locked on hers, sharp and questioning. Mira's mouth went dry, but she forced herself to continue. He's lying. Darian's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Excuse me? The southern border. You said it's quiet because there's no threat. Mira stood on shaking legs. But you're not worried about that. You're pleased. How dare you? Ilara started. Let her speak. Ronan's voice was deadly quiet. Mira's hands were trembling. But she met Darian's gaze. You're afraid. But not of Lucien Coren. You're afraid of being found out. The room erupted. Accusations flew. Darian stood, his face carefully neutral. But Mira could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers curled into fists. This is absurd, Darian said coldly. A frightened Omega girl making wild accusations. Sit down, Ronan said, and there was something in his voice that made even Darian obey. Ronan looked at Mira. Are you certain? Mira's entire body was shaking, but she nodded. I'm certain. The meeting dissolved into chaos. Ronan dismissed the council, keeping only Theron and 2 guards. Darian Voss was escorted out, his face a mask of icy control, but Mira saw the calculation in his eyes. When the room was empty except for Ronan and Mira, he turned to her. You just painted a target on yourself, he said quietly. I know. If you're wrong. I'm not wrong. Mira's voice was firmer now. I don't know how I know, but I know. Ronan stared at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his expression. Then he crossed the space between them in 3 strides and pulled her against him. Mira gasped, her hands flying to his chest. His heart was racing beneath her palms, as fast as her own. You're either very brave or very foolish, he murmured against her hair. Maybe both. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his eyes searching hers. You realize what you've done? You've made yourself indispensable to me. Is that such a bad thing? It's dangerous. Everything here is dangerous. His hand came up, cupping her face with surprising gentleness. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, and Mira's breath caught. Heat pooled in her stomach, spreading through her body like fire. Mira, he said, her name a question and a warning and something else she didn't dare name. Then he stepped back, breaking the contact. I'm assigning guards to you. You don't go anywhere alone. Understood? Mira nodded, still reeling from the brief contact, from the way her body had responded to him. As she left the war room, escorted by 2 silent guards, one thought echoed through her mind. She'd stopped being invisible. For better or worse, Ronan Drax saw her now. And in this place, being seen could either save her life or end it. The days after the council meeting were tense and strange. Mira was moved to a different room, closer to Ronan's quarters, with guards stationed outside at all times. Darian Voss had been confined to his chambers pending investigation. The entire keep buzzed with rumors and speculation. Mira found herself caught in a strange new reality. Wolves who had ignored her now watched her with wary respect. Others glared with open hostility. She'd become something she never expected important. It terrified her. Kaya brought meals and whispered updates. Lyra visited with books from the library, staying to talk about everything and nothing. But at night, alone in her new room, Mira couldn't escape the memory of Ronan's hand on her face, the way he'd looked at her like she was something precious and dangerous all at once. 5 nights after the council meeting, the court gathered for what they called a ceremonial dinner. Mira didn't understand the purpose until Alara Voss approached her before the meal, her smile sharp as glass. Tonight, the court expects the Alpha King to publicly claim his bride, Alara said. They'll want proof that this marriage is real, that an heir is coming. Mira's blood ran cold. What kind of proof? Use your imagination, dear. The great hall was transformed. Candles covered every surface, casting golden light that should have been beautiful but felt oppressive. The high table was set with silver and crystal. Wine flowed freely, and every eye watched Mira as she took her seat beside Ronan. He was dressed formally, all black leather and dark metal, his presence so commanding that the room seemed to bend around him. But when he looked at Mira, she saw tension in the set of his jaw. The meal began. Toasts were made. Wolves laughed too loudly, drank too much, and through it all, Mira felt the weight of expectation pressing down on her like a physical force. Halfway through the dinner, Cassian Rook stood, raising his glass. To the Alpha King and his bride. May their union bring strength to Drax and heirs to secure our future. The hall erupted in cheers and howls. Mira's hands clenched in her lap. Ronan stood, and silence fell. Thank you for your well wishes, but the matter of heirs is between my bride and myself, not the court. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Alara stood, her voice carrying. With respect, my king, the stability of the kingdom depends on a clear line of succession. The people need assurance that the people need to remember their place, Ronan said quietly, but his words cut through the hall like a blade. Mira is my bride. That makes her your future queen. Anyone who questions her place here questions me. He offered Mira his hand. She took it, her heart pounding, and let him lead her from the hall. The walk to his chambers was silent, the guards falling back to give them distance. When they reached his rooms, Ronan closed the door and leaned against it, his eyes closed. I'm sorry, he said. Mira blinked. For what? For subjecting you to that. For letting them think they have any right to demand anything from you. He opened his eyes, and the rawness in his expression stole her breath. They expect me to consummate this marriage tonight, to mark you, to take away any choice you have left. Mira's throat tightened. What do you expect? He pushed off the door and crossed to her slowly. When he stopped, He was close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the conflict warring in his eyes. "I expect nothing," he said quietly. "I want everything. But I won't take what isn't freely given." Mira's heart hammered against her ribs. "You could. No one would stop you." "I would stop me." His hand came up, fingertips ghosting along her jaw. "You were sold to me, Mira, traded like property. I won't make that worse by treating you like something I own." The tenderness in his touch, the careful restraint in his voice, it broke something inside her. Tears burned her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do you care?" "Because you stood in my courtyard soaking wet and terrified, and you still looked me in the eye. Because you speak when you should be silent, and you see things no one else sees." His thumb brushed across her lower lip, and fire shot through her veins. "Because you're the strongest person in this fortress, and you don't even know it." Mira's breath came in short gasps. She was acutely aware of every inch of space between their bodies, of the way his scent wrapped around her like smoke and pine and something wild. "What if I said yes?" The words left her mouth before she could think them through. Ronan's eyes darkened. "Mira, what if I chose this? Chose you?" Her hands came up, resting on his chest, feeling his heart race under her palms. "Not because I have to. Because I want to." "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying." She looked up at him, letting him see the truth in her eyes. "I'm tired of everyone else making decisions for me. For once, I want to choose. And I choose you." For a moment, he didn't move. Then his control shattered. He kissed her. It was nothing like she'd imagined. Not brutal or demanding, but slow and searching, as if he was trying to memorize the taste of her. His hands framed her face, thumbs stroking her cheeks as his mouth moved over hers with devastating gentleness. Mira melted into him, her fingers curling into his shirt. Heat spiraled through her body, pooling low in her stomach. When his tongue traced the seam of her lips, she opened for him, and the kiss deepened into something that made her knees weak. He pulled back, breathing hard. "Are you sure?" "Yes." He kissed her again, harder this time, his hands sliding down to her waist, pulling her flush against him. Mira gasped at the contact, at the solid strength of him, at the way her body seemed to fit perfectly against his. But when his hands moved to the laces of her dress, he paused. "Tell me to stop. Tell me you changed your mind. I won't be angry." Mira looked at him, really looked at him. At the Alpha King everyone feared, vulnerable, and open, and waiting for her answer. "Don't stop," she whispered. What followed was a dance of fire and tenderness. He undressed her slowly, his hands reverent, his eyes never leaving hers. Every touch was a question. Every kiss was a promise. When they finally came together, it was with her name on his lips and her hands tangled in his hair, both of them trembling with something far more powerful than simple desire. Afterward, they lay tangled in silk sheets, the firelight casting shadows across skin. Ronan traced patterns on her shoulder, his touch gentle. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly. Myra's contentment fractured slightly. "What?" "Your mother, Saphira Dune. I knew her, years ago, when I was still a prince, before I took the throne." His voice was careful. "There was an ambush, traitors from within my father's court. I barely escaped. I was bleeding, half dead, lost in Varen territory." Mira's breath caught. "And my mother found you. She hid me, healed me, sent me back to Drax when it was safe." He turned to look at her. "She saved my life, Mira. When I heard the Dune name on that contract, I knew who you were. I've known all along." Mira pulled back, staring at him. "You knew? This whole time?" "I couldn't refuse the contract without revealing why. And if anyone knew your family had sheltered me, they'd become targets." His eyes were full of regret. "I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner." Mira's mind reeled. Her mother had never mentioned it, never said a word, but it explained so much why Ronan had accepted the contract, why he'd protected her from the beginning. "My mother knew what she was doing," Myra said slowly. "She told me, right before I left. She said an Omega's heart could be stronger than any Alpha's command. She was telling me I could survive you." Ronan's hand found hers, threading their fingers together. "You did more than survive me. You changed everything." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other. The worst of the storm finally passed. But outside, in the dark corridors of Drax Keep, shadows moved and plans shifted. War was coming, and the debt bride who had become a queen would soon face her greatest test yet. The attack came at dawn. Mira woke to the sound of howling, not the song howls of greeting, but the raw, vicious howls of wolves at war. Ronan was already out of bed, pulling on clothes with swift efficiency. "Stay here," he commanded, strapping on armor. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me or Theron. What's happening? Lucien's forces. They're at the western gate. He paused, looking back at her, his eyes fierce. Whatever happens, Mira, stay alive. Do you understand? Stay alive. Then he was gone, the door slamming behind him. Mira dressed quickly, her hands shaking. The sounds of battle grew louder, steel on steel. Screams, the thunder of running feet. She moved to the window and saw smoke rising from the western quarter. Flames licking at the sky. Someone pounded on the door. Lady Mira, we need to move you to safety. It was Kaya's voice. Mira unlocked the door to find the young woman flanked by 2 guards, her face pale. Come with us. Now. They ran through corridors filled with chaos. Servants fled with children in their arms. Wounded wolves limped toward the healer's quarters. The keep that had felt like a prison now felt like a fortress under siege. Kaya led them to a reinforced chamber deep in the keep's heart. Other Omegas and children were already there, huddled together, fear thick in the air. You'll be safe here, Kaya said. The walls are 3 feet thick. Reinforced doors. Nothing's getting through. But Mira couldn't just hide. Not when Ronan was out there. Not when people were dying. I need to help, Mira said. You can't. I can organize supplies, coordinate messages. Something. Mira gripped Kaya's hands. Please, I can't just sit here. Kaya hesitated, then nodded. The healer's hall. They need every hand they can get. The healer's hall was a nightmare. Wounded wolves covered every surface, blood soaking through bandages, healers moving with desperate efficiency. An older woman with gray hair and steady hands directed the chaos Isolde Marin, one of the women Mira had met in the library. Can you tie sutures? Isolde asked sharply. Yes. Then get to work. Mira fell into the rhythm of it, cleaning wounds, holding pressure on bleeding, murmuring words of comfort to wolves who'd seen too much death. The hours blurred together, marked only by the changing faces of the wounded. Then Theron Cade was brought in, conscious but bleeding from a deep gash across his ribs. How bad is it out there? Mira asked as Isolde worked on him. Bad. Theron's voice was rough. Lucien brought twice the forces we expected. Someone told him exactly where our defenses were weakest. Mira's blood ran cold. Darien. We don't know for sure. He was confined, but... Theron winced as Isolde pulled a stitch tight. Information got out somehow. As the day wore into night, the sounds of battle finally began to fade. Word came in fragments. Lucien's forces had been pushed back, but at terrible cost. Dozens of Drax wolves were dead, more were wounded, and Ronan hadn't returned. Panic clawed at Mira's throat. She left the healer's hall despite Kaya's protests, her feet carrying her through blood-stained corridors toward the main courtyard. The scene outside was devastating. Wolves moved like ghosts through drifting snow, carrying their dead, searching for survivors. The western wall was partially collapsed, smoke still rising from burning buildings. And there, near the gates, she saw him. Ronan was on his knees in the snow, his armor dented and streaked with blood. Theron stood over him, and for one horrifying moment, Mira thought he was wounded. Then she realized he was holding someone, a young wolf, barely more than a boy, his chest barely rising. Mira ran. She fell to her knees beside them, her hands automatically reaching for the wound. He was protecting the Omegas, Ronan said, his voice raw. Stepped in front of Lucien's blade. He's just a kid. We can save him, Mira said fiercely. Theron, help me get him to the healers. Now. They carried the boy together, Ronan's hands shaking as he held pressure on the wound. Isolde took over the moment they arrived, her face grim but determined. Ronan stood in the corner, covered in blood, his own and others, his eyes hollow. Mira went to him. She took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. You did everything you could. It wasn't enough. We lost so many, but we didn't lose everything. The keep stands. The people are alive. She pressed her forehead to his. You're alive. He pulled her against him, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. I thought I'd lost you, when I heard fighting near the healer's hall. I'm here. I'm safe. They stood like that for a long moment, 2 people clinging to each other in the aftermath of violence, finding comfort in the simple fact of survival. Over the next few days, the truth emerged in pieces. Darien Voss had indeed been the traitor, using coded messages hidden in routine correspondence. He'd been working with Lucien for months, feeding information, undermining Ronan's defenses. But he hadn't worked alone. Elara Voss, his sister, had been complicit. Not out of allegiance to Lucien, but out of old jealousy and bitterness. She'd been betrothed to Ronan once, before he'd broken the engagement and claimed the throne. Her revenge had been patient and methodical. Both were now in chains, awaiting judgment. As Mira walked through the keep, helping where she could, she felt the shift. Wolves who'd sneered at her now nodded in respect. She'd proven herself not as a bride or a debt, but as someone who stood and fought when everything fell apart. Late one night, she found Ronan on the balcony overlooking the courtyard where she'd first arrived. He looked older, the weight of loss carved into his face. "We lost 32 wolves," he said quietly. 32 people who trusted me to keep them safe." Mira stood beside him. "You can't control everything. Even kings can't stop death. I should have seen it. Should have known Darian was the leak." "You did know. You just needed proof." She leaned against the stone railing. "Now you have it, and the traitors will face justice." Ronan turned to her, something shifting in his expression. "You've changed. Mira, you're not the frightened girl from the courtyard anymore." "No, I'm not." She met his eyes. "I'm whoever I choose to be, and I choose to be someone who fights, someone who matters. You've always mattered." His hand found hers. "I just didn't know how much until I almost lost you." They stood together as snow began to fall, soft and quiet, covering the blood-stained stones below. The war wasn't over. Lucienne would come again. The kingdom was wounded and vulnerable. But for the first time since Mira had arrived at Drax Keep, she felt like she belonged, not as a debt or a prisoner, but as someone who had earned her place beside the Alpha King. And whatever came next, they would face it together. 3 weeks after the battle, the courtyard of Drax Keep filled with wolves. Every pack member who could stand was present, along with representatives from allied territories. The air hummed with anticipation and uncertainty. Mira stood in her chambers, looking at herself in the mirror. Kaya had helped her dress in a gown of deep midnight blue, elegant and strong. Her hair was woven with silver thread, and for the first time since arriving at Drax, she looked like she belonged. "You ready?" Lyra asked from the doorway, her expression warm. "No," Mira admitted, "but I'm going anyway." They walked through the keep together, Lyra offering quiet encouragement. At the doors leading to the balcony where Ronan waited, Mira paused. "Whatever happens today," Lyra said, "you've already won. You survived. That's more than most people thought you would." Mira squeezed her hand and stepped through the doors. The balcony overlooked the massive courtyard, and every face below turned upward as she appeared. Ronan stood at the center, dressed in formal armor, the Drax crest displayed prominently. His eyes found Mira's, and something in his expression softened. He offered his hand. She took it. Together, they faced the assembled wolves. "Many of you have questioned the choices I've made," Ronan said, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "You questioned why I accepted a debt bride, why I brought an Omega with no training, no power, no status into this court." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Some of you saw her as a weakness, a distraction, a mistake." His grip on Mira's hand tightened. "You were wrong." He turned to face her fully, and Mira's heart raced. Mira Dune came to Drax Keep as payment for her family's debts. She had no choice in this marriage, no say in her fate. By the laws of our pacts, by the terms of the contract, she has fulfilled her obligation. The Dune debt is cleared. She is free to leave if she chooses. Shock rippled through the crowd. Mira's breath caught. He was giving her an out. A real choice. After everything, after the battle, after the nights they'd spent tangled together, after all the whispered promises, he was letting her go. But before she makes that choice, Ronan continued, his eyes never leaving hers, "I need to say something, not as a king, but as a man who has been a fool." He dropped to one knee in front of her, in front of the entire pack, and the courtyard went absolutely silent. "I wanted to hate you," Ronan said, his voice rough with emotion. "It would have been easier, but from the moment you looked me in the eye and refused to bow, you changed everything. You exposed traitors I couldn't see. You saved lives in battle. You made me believe that an Alpha and an Omega could be equals, partners, not master and property." Mira's eyes burned with tears. "I'm offering you a choice, Mira. A real one, not one made under contracts or threats or duty." He pulled something from his pocket, a ring, simple and elegant, marked with the Drax crest. "Stay with me. Not as a debt bride, but as my chosen mate, my equal, my queen. Stand beside me and help me remake this kingdom into something better than what we inherited." The courtyard held its breath. Mira looked at the ring, then at Ronan's face, proud and vulnerable all at once. She thought about the girl who'd arrived in chains, terrified and alone. She thought about everything she'd survived, everything she'd become. "You really think you can handle an Omega Queen?" she asked, a hint of challenge in her voice. Relief and love blazed in his eyes. I'm terrified of it, and I wouldn't want it any other way. Mira smiled, tears spilling down her cheeks. Then I choose you, Ronan Drax. Not because I'm forced to. Not because I'm afraid, but because I love the arrogant, stubborn, impossible man who learned how to bend, who chose me when he didn't have to. She pulled him to his feet and kissed him in front of the entire pack, claiming him as thoroughly as he'd claimed her. The courtyard erupted, not in polite applause, but in howls, joyous, wild, accepting. The pack bowed, but not in submission, in respect, to their king and to the woman who'd proven herself worthy to stand beside him. When they finally pulled apart, Ronan slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her all along. The Drax line is secure, Ronan announced to the crowd, and any wolf who questions your queen's place answers to me. Over the following months, Mira transformed from survivor to leader. She established protections for Omegas throughout Drax territory, ensuring that no one else would be sold or traded like she had been. She worked with Lyra to create a council that included voices from all levels of the pack hierarchy, not just alphas. Ronan stood beside her through all of it, his initial arrogance tempered by the love of a woman who refused to be anything less than his equal. Lucien Coren eventually sued for peace, his forces weakened by the failed attack and by whispers that the Drax court was now stronger than ever. The southern border remained tense, but no longer burned. Darian and Elara Voss faced judgment. Their betrayal cost them everything: their titles, their freedom, their place in the pack. Some argued for execution, but Mira advocated for exile instead. Let them live with their shame, she said. Death would be too easy. One evening, 6 months after the battle, Mira found herself back on the balcony where everything had changed. Snow fell softly, covering the world in quiet white. Ronan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. Do you ever regret it? He asked quietly. Staying? Mira leaned back against him, feeling safe and chosen and home. Never. Do you regret giving me the choice? Every day. When she stiffened, he chuckled. Because if you'd chosen differently, I'd have had to follow you. And I have a kingdom to run. Very inconvenient. She elbowed him lightly, and he laughed, the sound rich and genuine. They stood together as darkness fell, watching the lights of the keep come alive below them. Mira thought about the contract her father had signed, about the scared girl who'd stood in the rain, convinced her life was over, about the long journey from debt bride to queen. She'd survived the most arrogant and dangerous alpha king in the northern courts. More than that, she'd tamed him, not by breaking his spirit, but by showing him that true strength came from choosing partnership over dominance. And when their first child was born the following spring, a daughter with her mother's stubborn spirit and her father's storm-gray eyes, the entire pack celebrated, not because of bloodlines or succession, but because they saw what Mira and Ronan had created together, a new kind of kingdom. One built on choice, respect, and the revolutionary idea that an Omega's heart could be just as powerful as an Alpha's command. Years later, when Mira's daughter asked about how her parents met, Mira smiled and told her the truth. Your father was arrogant and dangerous and impossible. Everyone feared him, and I was sold to him like property, with no choice and no power. So what did you do? Her daughter asked, eyes wide. I survived him. I challenged him. I loved him. And I taught him that the strongest bonds aren't the ones we're forced into, but the ones we choose every single day. Her daughter considered this. What did Daddy learn? Myra glanced across the room where Ronan sat with their son, teaching him the proper way to hold a wooden sword. He caught her looking and smiled. That same dangerous, beautiful smile that still made her heart race. He learned that the most arrogant king in the world can still bend his knee to the right woman. And that love, real love, isn't about ownership. It's about choosing each other, over and over again, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Did you live happily ever after? Her daughter asked. Mira kissed her forehead. We lived, we fought, we loved. We built something better than either of us could have created alone. And that, my darling, is better than any fairy tale ending. Because Mira Dune had learned the most important lesson of all. Happiness wasn't something given or taken. It was something you fought for, built with your own hands, and protected with everything you had. And she had fought, she had built, she had protected. And in the end, the debt bride became a queen not because of a contract or a crown, but because she'd never stopped being exactly who she was meant to be. Strong, stubborn, unbreakable, and deeply, impossibly, forever loved. And that's Mira's story from debt bride to chosen queen. If this story made your heart race, made you believe in second chances, or made you feel something real, please do me a huge favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to Ariel Romance Library, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story like this. Share this video with someone who loves powerful romance and wolves who learn to love. And please, drop a comment down below telling me where you're watching from and what part of Mira and Ronan's story hit you the hardest. Did you love the moment he gave her a choice? The council confrontation? That balcony scene? I read every single comment, and your support means everything. Thank you so much for being here and letting me share this story with you. Until next time, keep believing in love that's chosen, not forced. See you in the next one.